Hello, my name is Nancy Love, and I'm making this video on behalf of the Planet Peace Project. This is one in a series of the behavioral health videos, and it has to do with unhealthy obsessions. In fact, obsessions, OCD disorder that is truly clinically insane. It is probably not a coincidence. I'm going to speak slowly in case this feed is discontinuous. This eats up a lot of gigs. Um, I don't know that it's necessarily a coincidence that both of these fellows call themselves macho men. They are either Mexican citizens or people who were born in America that are Hispanic, but they do come from a culture that unfortunately devalues women and promotes misogyny. Now, I have known so many Hispanic men who aren't anything like that. And please forgive me because I'm not talking about those people. I've known, brilliant, philosophical, magnanimous, egalitarian Hispanic men. So I'm not talking about the vast majority of them. I'm talking about two in particular that I've encountered within the last year. Both of these people have come on to women, plural apparently, that have moved in with them under the auspices of just a platonic roommate. In both cases, the females would say, just need a place to live, not here for sex, romance, marriage, love, any of that, just need a place to sleep, eat, store my possessions, get the work, and so forth. But instead of honoring both the woman's assertions that they're not interested in any kind of romance or sex, um, and the men's assertions that that won't happen, no problem, no issues, platonic is the way to go. Excuse me. Uh, these two people have become extremely dangerously obsessive. In at least one case, possibly two, there's talk about illegal marriage. Uh, one guy in San Diego says that he drugged a woman who didn't want to marry him and wasn't interested in him. He drugged her and had some kind of devil worshipping ceremony. I can't make stuff like this up, man. I may be a creative genius, but even I can't think of stuff this weird. He tried to get possibly a legal license to do it by going in with somebody with a fake ID, pretending to be the woman who was not interested in him. And it's really, really crazy. I mean that very literally. As someone with 72 hours of psychology, it's really, really insane. That guy had admitted to me, and he was very forthcoming. He at one point asked me to be his counselor, and we had some very informative talks. I Last I heard from one of his neighbors, he had been convicted of sexually assaulting a 70-year-old woman at knife point and was in prison for that and other forms of criminal activity, I think all of which was toward females, also including his mother. Oh, God. Yeah. So, the first guy I'm talking about would move several people in, and he would become obsessed with them. He asked one lady to marry him within the first 24 hours. Then he threatened to sexually assault her. Uh, he kept asking her repeatedly for several weeks to marry him, and she was very rational and distanced herself from him and said, that's not only not part of my goal structure right now, but it's not even possible for me to think that way about someone I barely know. So there's a red flag. I'll paint that flag red if somebody doesn't see it. And keep in mind that he is doing this, both of these people are doing this to women who are mature in years and have been around the block and back and know better. So it's not like they're doing it to a teenager who's going to be flattered by that obsessive attention. They're doing it to people who know better and fear that and understand that obsessive compulsive disorder, when taken to that extreme, that far end of the continuum, is an extremely dangerous thing. So the guy in San Diego started saying, literally within the first day of meeting this highly intelligent, rational, well-educated, business experienced person who wasn't there for any shenanigans of any sort, that he was going to subjugate her, and that, I'm not joking, he said that she was not supposed to look at, smile at, or speak to other men. He tried to go with her wherever she went. He really tried to control her life. There may have been illegal, he may have been putting illegal camera surveillance and possibly audio surveillance in her bedroom and bathroom, which is icky. And I mean, that's really sick, man. And he was also, from what I understand, cloning phones and hacking equipment and obsessively reading texts and basically being a total nut job. But as far as I understand, like I said, last time I spoke to one of his neighbors, he was in jail. I mean, in prison. He'd been convicted to it and sentenced. And the 70-year-old woman who lived nearby had actually moved out and was safe with her family. So that's all good news. Then there's another person, a Mexican national, who calls himself a macho man, and it's really scary because he's drugged up, or one psychologist, one person who has a PhD in psychology that I spoke about this person with, said that he thinks the fellow is bipolar and or schizophrenic. Now, we know for sure obsessive compulsive disorder at level 10, extreme level, is in play. And I pointed out that the fellow appears to have submissive aggressive disorder as well. He will tense up and not speak and not deal with problems or issues or, relatively minor things that come up in any kind of relationship normally. He'll store it up and then explode. And I think we've all seen that pattern. There are certain types of environments that, in fact, breed that pattern. Highly controlling parents who don't let children own their own anger or communicate adequately tend to groom children to be adults with submissive aggressive personality disorder, because after all, they were not allowed to express themselves, communicate over minor details until they had so many issues stored up, they just blew. So, excuse me. Hey, dark mold grows in LA. It's rained a lot here. So, the second person has a horrifying criminal history. He was a drinker, used to slug things out in bars. He got into a lot of bar fights and so forth. He has a lot of facial damage as a result of that, and probably brain damage. He may have traumatic brain injury syndrome, which could explain a lot. But he does things like he'll move someone in. He'll either advertise on Craigslist or similar online sites, or this is important because anybody can, this can happen to any well-meaning person who simply needs a place to live and answers an online ad. That happens a million times a day in Los Angeles. There's all kinds of people all over our more than 500 square miles that are, moving in with people they don't know well at all. And then once they've moved all their possessions in and are more vulnerable, then the horror starts, and your life can very quickly turn into a Stephen King movie. So The people seem nice, they seem decent and articulate or whatever, and then they turn out to be, somebody's nightmare. So this other guy, in one case, moved a lady in. They had talked on the phone for hours, and she kept saying she wasn't interested in any kind of romantic entanglement, sexuality, anything like that. She was a very focused and goal-oriented professional and wanted to work on her financial and professional well-being. And he said, yeah, that's fine. No issues, no worries, won't touch you. And then 3 or 4 days, she said, after she moved in, she was going to go to the convenience store to get a cup of coffee and a couple of items, and he tried to climb in her vehicle with her. Unasked for, unwanted, didn't need the company. And she said this guy was like pleading with her to get in and go with her. And when she said why, he said that he said he knew how men think and that everyone would rape her and that she looked like a little old lady to people and that if she went to the store alone, uh, men were going to throw her over and rape her in the parking lot. And she said that's when she took the keys out. She, forbade him from getting into her car, and she said, no, we need to talk. Because no, not all men are like that. And she did tell him that she'd been to plenty of convenience stores plenty of times without incident. And it gets stranger from there. Here again, the stalking. I have made videos before about how human traffickers, spouse abusers, and this kind of person all tend to use the same techniques. They try to isolate the person. They try to discredit the person. And more on that in a minute. So that when the person complains, the victim complains, they won't be believed or whatever. They stalk online, they hack email and so forth, they clone phones, and they can stalk in person. And at least in the second case, the guy actually has a criminal cohort that takes off days of work and stalks the woman in exchange for something. I don't know. But for some reason, he'll actually tell the victims, and he himself admits that there may have been at least 3 within the last calendar year that he's done this to for the other guy. He'll physically, get in his car and follow them and stuff like that in exchange maybe for reduced rent or something. I don't know what their relationship is or exchange, that is all about. But there are various techniques that people use to subjugate victims. Now, one cogent example of the second guy's behavior that I'd like to mention is that he gets extremely upset if his new mark or his new victim so much as talks to or speaks to another male. Here again, he doesn't want her talking to, looking at, or communicating with, or bonding with, befriending other men. He's that threatened, he's that insecure, and he's that out of line because there's no, there's no basis for any kind of possessive relationship. And even if there was a romance between them, there would not be a basis for that kind of possessive relationship, right? So he does things like this. She had made comments that were positive toward the Hispanic people. She's not Hispanic. And I don't know, he's doing this possibly to Caucasians, Hispanics, white Asians. He's doing it to a different races of people. But she had made some comments that were very pro-Hispanic, and she loved the culture. She had many friends who were Hispanic, and so he started calling himself her Mexican boyfriend, and said that he knew that she wanted a Mexican boyfriend. Then, some weeks later, she had posted online in social media some things that were very positive toward Black people and basically Black political leaders. People like Karen Bass, or people like Martin Luther King, or John Lewis, or people who happen to be Afro American and have done incredibly beautiful, powerful things politically for social causes. So then he says, "Oh, I thought you liked Mexicans. Now you like blacks. Now you want a black boyfriend?" And I'm thinking, oh my God. The woman didn't place a personal ad. She said something nice about Martin Luther King and applauded Karen Bass's inauguration as mayor of Los Angeles, and said that John Lewis was a great pioneer of civil rights and stuff like that. She didn't want a black boyfriend. She didn't want a Mexican boyfriend. She didn't want a freaking boyfriend. But there he was, insanely misinterpreting. See, that's insanity, to misinterpret someone's innocent political statement. She wasn't looking for a boyfriend. She was making a political statement. Hello. But to extrapolate from someone's normal rational behavior uh, to into some kind of obsession where he feels threatened is really sick and insane. There was another case, another situation I knew of where if the new roommate so much as looked at a male and spoke to him in a kind or polite fashion for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, the guy would he'd like get up and start pacing. He'd clench his fists. He'd start pacing around like a chained dog, and he would say, "Oh, now you like him, huh? Now you like him." And she was going, "Whoa, now I certainly don't like you for complaining that I just looked at a guy for 5 minutes and talked to him. Been doing that for quite a few years. Don't need permission and don't need people who don't have any right to complain about that behavior reading something into a 5-minute conversation that is absolutely not there." The first guy had severe obsessive compulsive disorder. He was diagnosed as such. He may have at some point gone on medication. The second guy absolutely has the worst cases of obsessive compulsive disorder I've ever seen. And when I talked to a person that is in social work, she totally pegged it as sexual obsession or as a sex addiction. She said it sounds like on a scale of 1 to 10, he's an 11 for as a sex addict. And I thought, wow, that's a very astute, statement. So all that to point out that these people seem normal and nice the first few days or whatever. And then very, very quickly, there's this subjugation, there's this misogyny, there's this obsession with controlling. And it just gets to be really, really unfortunate and frightening. And I think that it can have tragic consequences. Keep in mind that the vast majority of people who have a psychological diagnosis of OCD are very manageable. They have relatively normal lives. They have fairly minor symptoms. If they have more severe symptoms, there are medications that can be very, very helpful and help them think and perceive and behave normally. But uncontrolled OCD is extremely dangerous, and these are the people who kill their wives. These are the people who kill their girlfriends. These are the people who want so much to control every nuance of someone else's behavior that they will literally kill them to control them, all the way into the grave. So there's a lot to say about this, and I will offer more insights, but I think one of the most important things is that we think this kind of thing happens to younger women, and we think that they're not trained and they haven't seen the signs and they don't have the experience and they are more vulnerable. What I've seen in both of these cases is these men are preying on women in their age group, primarily women in their 50s and 60s. And in the first case, the woman who was 70. So this sort of thing can happen to anyone. And this sort of thing is happening to fairly astute, well-trained, educated, rational women. And once these people already live with the person and all their possessions are in and they, don't have the funds to relocate right away, then it's a very horrifying thing. And I want law enforcement to be aware of both of these people. I have discussed the first guy with everyone from his court-ordered counselor to the police to the FBI to the DEA because he was involved with drugs and so forth. And now I'm going ahead and have been talking about the second guy to all of the above. One person with a background in psychology said that the guy sounds like he's on cocaine. Another person who has a background in psychology insisted the person was probably on GHB because he'll get real elated and then real angry, and that might be bipolar or it might be drugs making him seem bipolar. I said, don't leap to that organic brain syndrome diagnosis yet. Wait until you do drug tests, because I think someone who is on cocaine or another type of drug that causes both, initially elation and stimulation, and then later, as it's assimilated, sedation and depression, that could mask, that could look like bipolar when in point of fact it's a drug use disorder. So these are very complicated issues, and people need to have a thorough understanding not only of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for the Social Sciences, but also anatomy, physiology, behavioral medicine, and toxicity, drug toxicity. Anyway, try not to have a roommate from hell. Try not to be a roommate from hell. If any of this sounds familiar, as and you're being victimized, try to get away from these people because they can be really toxic and terrifying and dangerous. And if this sounds familiar because you're one of these people who becomes bizarrely obsessed with people who you barely know and have no right to try to control, then get help because it's there. And the more honest and frank and forthright you are about your symptoms and the maladjusted relationships they've caused, and the fact that people are trying to get the heck away from you as fast as they can, because they say things like, you're obsessed with me and it's not comfortable and I'm afraid of you. The one lady of the second guy, she says she's utterly and absolutely terrified of this guy. And he's caused her to basically have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. She just goes into like what Hans Selye and others called fight or flight response when she even sees him. So now, I think she still lives there. She's trying to avoid him as if he is bubonic plague personified. She tries to live in the same house with someone that she tries to never even so much as lay eyes on because she's so completely terrified of this guy who tried to climb into her car. Oh yeah. This is one thing I want to say. The day the second guy tried to climb into that lady's car who was going to the convenience store, he started shrieking at her at the top of his lungs, outside, in front of the neighbors and everything, in front of God and everyone. he started shrieking at her. He said, "Do you accept your role as a child and me as your father, as your God?" And she was like, "What?" And he said, "Do you accept your role as a child and me as your father, as your God?" And he spread his arms and like a megalomaniac. And she went, "This guy is completely insane." And that's why, it's comments like that, behavior like that, that make me want to agree with the guy I mentioned, the fellow with the PhD in psychology, who said the guy sounds not only delusional from maybe some drug use or brain injury, but he sounds schizophrenic. He sounds like he's got full-blown schizophrenia, and it's undiagnosed and it's uncontrolled. So what I learned in graduate school was that I was working on an MSW years ago and finished all my coursework for it. But what I learned was that bipolar and schizophrenic people tend to be the categories of people most likely to physically assault clinical workers. If they're in institutions, bipolars and schizophrenics are the most likely to assault doctors, nurses, and other staff members. In my personal experience and anecdotal research and studies, and my education as a counselor out in the field, I see obsessive compulsive, the full-blown, undiagnosed, untreated obsessive compulsive person is the person most likely to physically attack partners or roommates, romantic partners, or just, platonic roommates. These people are so literally obsessed with trying to control other human beings that they will physically lash out and try to achieve that control that way. Anyway, more later. Hope this has been informative. And unfortunately, it's not that much fun, but oh well. More later. I'm just getting started here.